TWX 3580. We implore anyone who's on our highways and byways who should see that vehicle bearing that tag to call 911 immediately and report his whereabouts. Try to keep that vehicle in sight. We believe perhaps that Mr. Jones remains armed and he's to be considered dangerous and treated accordingly. I want to share some information with you because I want to be transparent with you. I want you to know what I know to the extent that I can share that information this afternoon. Mr. Jones came to the attention of the University of Virginia's threat assessment team in the fall of 2022. In fact, in September of 2022, our Office of Student Affairs reported to the multidisciplinary threat assessment team that Mr. Jones, they received information that Mr. Jones had made a comment about possessing a gun to a person that was unaffiliated with the university. In other words, a third party. That reporting person, again, unaffiliated with the university, to the best of our knowledge, never saw a gun. The comment about Mr. Jones owning a gun was not made in conjunction with any threats. The Office of Student Affairs followed up with the reporting person and made efforts to contact Mr. Jones. In fact, they followed up with Mr. Jones' roommate, who did not report seeing the presence of a weapon. Pardon me. Thank you, Captain. We just received information the suspect is in custody. Just need a moment to thank God. Breathe a sigh of relief. Mr. Jones also had come to the attention of our threat assessment team because he was involved in a hazing investigation of some sort. I don't know the facts and circumstances of that investigation. I know that it was eventually closed due to witnesses that would not cooperate with the process. But through the course of the threat assessment team's investigation, we learned of a prior criminal incident involving a concealed weapon violation that occurred outside the city of Charlottesville in February of 2021. What's interesting about that case is he's required as a student at the University of Virginia to report that, and he never did. And so the university has taken appropriate administrative charges through the university's Judiciary Council, and that matter is still pending adjudication. Thought it important to share that information with you, to let you know that he had been called to our attention, and to answer any questions you might have about that. I want you to hear that. I want you to hear that from me, not hear it from someone else. So I'll stop there, and we'll take any questions that you might have.
I'll call him out. We have time for a couple questions, Measure.
Chief or President, can you discuss where the field trip was going, the affiliation of the people that were on that bus and on that field trip, and if the suspect was part of that trip or stepped onto the bus?
Thank you for the question. The information we have at this time is that the field trip was associated with a class, and the individuals that have been named were part of that trip to see a play. That is, to see a play associated with the class. So it was a class field trip.
Was the suspect in that class? Or
I do not have those details.
Do you know what class it was?
I do not.
What play it was?
I'm sorry?
You know what play it was?
I do not. We're seeking out all of that information. As you can imagine, the students are quite traumatized by the tragic events.
Was the play in Washington, D.C.?
I do not have the exact location. We are finalizing all of that.
Thank you.
The three victims who died were football players.
So the play was in Washington, D.C.
Where and how was the suspect?
I have not been shared that information yet, and it will come a point in time when we will share that information, I'm sure, but now is not the most appropriate time.
Two football players as well, the ones who are injured? Because you mentioned the three who had died were football players.
We're not releasing information about the patients who are still in the hospital at this time.
Right in the back left.
Yeah, Chief, you mentioned the previously brought to your attention. Did your office ever make contact, or the student assessment office ever make contact with Jones prior to this?
I can't speak for student affairs. The University Police Department had no contact him with this. The University Police Department is one of many people that's on that multidisciplinary threat assessment team, and we provide some of the background with respect to individuals that come before that team, but to my knowledge, we did not have any contact with Mr. Jones with regard to that incident.
Is there a ballpark figure on how many people were on the bus?
My understanding is ballpark about 25.
And can you tell us how he got away and how he was apprehended? Was he walking? Was he driving?
Don't know how he got away or how it was that he fled the scene, and I don't have information with respect to how he was apprehended.
Go ahead, sir.
Chief, any details you can share about what led to the shooting? Have the other folks on the bus been interviewed?
We're in the process of doing that now.
No details you can share at this time about whether there's a conflict?
Yeah, not at this time.
Go ahead.
When and where did the third victim die if the two were found dead on the bus?
Third victim was transported to the medical center and died there.
Time for just a couple more. Go ahead.
Do we know Mr. Jones's status? At one point, he was on the football team. He was still a student here as of this morning. Was he still affiliated with the football team?
He was still a student, but to my knowledge, he was no longer on the football team and hadn't been on the team for over a year.
Are you able to
And
the two individuals?
the two other victims were students.
Time for two more. Go ahead in the long cup.
Did students know at all who the suspect prior to this? Was there any relationship?
I don't know to what extent they had a relationship with him. I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, final question, Ryan.
Chief Longo, you personally have been involved with so many tragedies that have happened here in Charlottesville. If you could just talk, I don't know if you've been able to process those feelings at all, what this community has been through over the past decade or so, and how this impacts all of that right now.
I don't know that I've really had time to process that to the extent that you speak of. I can tell you that the people that are standing behind me now, it speaks for itself, how we get through these things. These agencies that are represented here were on these grounds very quickly. I'll try to do better next time. That's all I have for right now. We can't do this alone, and we obviously haven't. And we
Found on campus, or off campus at least?
Or where he's in custody, or he was brought into custody?
Well, I can tell you to the best of my knowledge, he was not found on campus. I cannot tell you where he was located or where he was taken into custody or where he's located now.
State police take him into custody?
We'll have more information on that. Thank you all very much. Everybody get back to we'll have more information as we have it. Thank you all very much for coming today.
So there you have it, Steve and everyone, 3 members.
That was an update there from Charlottesville, Virginia, as they were providing an update on that tragic situation from earlier today, earlier overnight there, as the 3 football players were killed. You heard the emotion in the voice of those officials as they learned the suspect was now in custody right in the middle of that press conference. Certainly an emotional moment for everyone there on campus as they're mourning the loss of 3 members of that community, 3 members of the football team there for the Cavaliers. Well, right here on Live Now for Fox, we're keeping you updated on all of these latest new developments.
threats of violence and even violence itself, not only on January 6th, but often directed at the people running our elections. These are nice, hardworking people. All they want to do is do their job and make sure the votes are counted properly, and they get threatened. And what bothered the American people even more, Madam President, than this was the fact that too many Republican leaders either condoned the violence or even aided and abetted the threats of violence. It was outrageous. But lots of people saw right through it, and not just Democrats. Large numbers of Republicans said, this new MAGA Republican Party is not the party of Ronald Reagan, not the party of the Bushes. It's a different party, and I can't countenance it. And that's why so many of them voted for Democratic candidates who were paying attention to the specific issues, non-divisive, non-incendiary, just helping people. And that's why I believe we won the election. So where do we go from here, Madam President? Well, I'll say one more thing. The midterms are not over. Obviously, there's an election in Georgia. And once again, we have the contrast. Senator Warnock is a man dedicated to service. He first serviced people in the ministry, and he still is the minister, the pastor of one of the most famous and revered pulpits in the entire country, in the Ebenezer Baptist Church, the old pulpit of Martin Luther King, Jr. But he became a senator, and that devotion to service continued. He was one of our leaders in establishing a $35 cap on insulin so that tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Georgians and millions of Americans, elderly, who needed that insulin. And now the drug companies, even though it's not a patented drug, were charging $600, $700, $800 a month. He helped with health care. He helped get money for $4 billion for black farmers who had been discriminated against for decades. And so I believe this election, this new election in Georgia, will be like the election that we've had last Tuesday. The candidate who's trying to help people, the candidate who's not being divisive and incendiary, will win, Raphael Warnock. Now, where should we go in the next 2 years? I hope this chamber, for the good of the American people, will continue in its record of getting bipartisan things done. Of the 6 major bills we passed in June and July and early August, 5 were bipartisan. And our hierarchy as Democrats is to work on a bipartisan basis whenever we can. And we showed we were able to. There are times when we can't get our Republicans to join us. None of them wanted to go against Big Pharma, and we had to pass prescription drugs on ourselves. None of them wanted to go against big oil, so we had to pass climate change for ourselves. But we got a lot of bipartisan things done. And my hope for America, for the sake of America, this is a swirling world. People are not happy with their circumstances.
You're listening in there to Chuck Schumer here on the Senate floor. Of course, we want to take you out as we see Harris County as officials there are stepping up to the podium. Let's listen in here live on Live Now from Fox.
Yes, well, we have a special hat position. Hat position.
What am I supposed to say? 8 minutes, 16? Oh.
Just for the audio.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You guys ready? Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Siegel. I'm the chairman of the Harris County Republican Party. We've called you here. We want to make some announcements as it relates to legal action that the party's taken. Under Texas Elections Code, Section 276.019, it's illegal for the election official to deviate from the election code. We're doing this in order to shed light on what has been happening, how Harris County actually runs their elections. You know, what we've seen over the past year, instead of it just being a few incidences of breakdown and how the process has been run, we've seen what's turned out to be a systemic cancer in how Harris County actually runs its elections. You know, we started this, we saw it in the primary, that there were mass failures in terms of staffing, double staffing, the equipment not working, etc. Then May 7th came along, which was a small election related to some of the city councils, the small school boards. And what happened there is, in fact, we were hearing about ballot boxes that didn't get delivered, and they were telling the election judge to just bring it in the next day. So this summer and during the spring, you know, we all know that Isabel Longoria actually resigned as the prior election administrator. And what the county responded was, we can clean it up, we can fix it ourselves. They hired a firm to do a review, but what we've seen is, in fact, the county hasn't fixed it. We saw more problems, more egregious problems last Tuesday on November 8th. Again, staffing problems, polls not opening on time. They didn't have equipment. There were many polls that had maybe a third of their equipment working during the day. People would call, our judges would be calling in, requesting help. They would wait on hold for 45 minutes, or they would never, the county would never actually pick up the call from their helpline. And then the most egregious was the fact that we had polls that actually ran out of paper. And we, in the party, notified the county. We called election administrator Tatum and notified his management team as early as approximately 10 or 10:30 on Tuesday morning. And they continued to argue with my staff, with the judges, that they said, you have enough paper. So that's why we're taking the legal action that we're announcing today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our legal counsel, Andy Taylor.
Thank you, Chair Siegel. My name is Andy Taylor. I'm an election lawyer, and I represent the Harris County Republican Party. We're here to announce that just a few moments ago, we filed a 20-page lawsuit in state district court. The plaintiffs are the Harris County Republican Party and its chair, Cindy Siegel. The defendants are the election administrator, who is Clifford Tatum, and indeed Harris County itself. This lawsuit should have never been required to have been filed, but because of the actions of the defendants, in particular the election administrator, Cliff Tatum, we had to, in order to be able to restore any confidence in elections going forward in Harris County. I want to tell you a little bit about this lawsuit and explain why we did it. So, as you know, this election was so botched that it has risen to the level of an epic proportion, and there is no way to be confident in the outcome of these close races. You literally cannot ascertain the winner versus the loser. Let me give you a few examples. How can it be that when voters go to vote on election day, there's not enough paper? If you don't have paper, you can't vote. We found just in our first day of investigation 23 polling locations on election day that didn't have any paper. And just looking at 2 of those locations, 350 registered innocent voters who came to exercise their constitutional right to vote were turned away. That is absolutely unacceptable. And the party is here to say to Clifford Tatum, shame on you. You knew better. You know what turnout was like in earlier elections. It was not difficult to be able to send a sufficient number of ballots to the polls, and yet you didn't. And why is that? Why is it that our initial investigation demonstrates that the polling sites that didn't get paper were Republican strongholds? That's a concern. That makes us wonder if this is something more than just a colossal screw-up. Was this intentional? That's why the governor of Texas just a few hours ago issued a request of the Texas Rangers, of the Attorney General of Texas, and also the Secretary of State to open and launch an investigation into what just exactly happened in Harris County. Let me give you a second example that our lawsuit talks about. When you go to the poll, you have to scan your ballot into a scanning machine. If there is a problem with one or both of those pieces of paper going into the machine, the process is very simple. You put the problem ballot and you segregate it into something called an emergency chute. That's a receptacle that holds all of these problem ballots, the purpose of which is to earmark those for the central count that's downtown or actually at NRG where they're supposed to do their work and they count these problem ballots. That's not the way Harris County ran this. Instead, they gave a new set of ill-advised instructions to people that were not trained. These are not election lawyers. These are volunteers who are trying to do their level best, and they're civic-minded, and they gave them a set of instructions that were absolutely impossible to understand. And what it resulted in is the election officials were putting ballots in that chute that weren't supposed to go there. And you know what that means? It means that there's double counting. So we have got innocent voters who now have accidentally voted not once, but twice. And if you have double votes and a hard count, how can you ascertain the true outcome of any particular race that is close? But it gets worse than that. On Election Day, we find out that there is an emergency hearing. This is at 5, 6 p.m. at night, where the polls are supposed to close at 7. I'm not even invited as the lawyer for Harris County to be part of this hearing, but we find out about it. So we jump on Zoom, we get on the emergency hearing, and we find out that there is this unholy alliance, this agreement between plaintiffs who filed this emergency lawsuit and Clifford Tatum, who's supposed to be handling this election in a manner that protects everybody's right to vote, and they got together in a collusive manner, didn't give notice to the Republican Party, and they agreed and asked the judge to sign an order that would allow voting to occur for 1 additional hour. Now, at first blush, you might think, what's wrong with that? Why don't we want to give people more time to vote? Isn't that an American and a Texan thing to do? Well, if you didn't screw it up so badly, Clifford Tatum, it would have been. But you know what they did? They voted for an extra hour and made all of the problems worse because many of the polls still didn't have paper. So now we have people voting an extra hour, while other polls that are, by the way, in Republican strongholds, not getting to vote. In addition, they're supposed to have people who vote after 7 by court order to vote in what's called a provisional ballot. The reason for that is the provisional ballot is segregated from all of the other votes that are in the hard count. Well, guess what? Because Tatum didn't train his folks, they didn't segregate. And in fact, we have evidence that we've uncovered that people who came to vote for that extra hour, their vote is in the hard count. It's not segregated as a provisional ballot. In addition, you're supposed to segregate the provisional ballots that are before 7 from those that are after 7. Indeed, we had to go to the Supreme Court of Texas after this unholy alliance led to this illegal agreed order allowing for people to vote an extra hour, and the Supreme Court ordered that everything had to be segregated. And yet, did they? No, they didn't. And lastly, they actually had some polls that closed at 7, while other polls continued to accept voting for an hour. When you have 782 polling locations and you're not uniformly handling voting in those locations, that is a recipe for utter chaos and disaster. And that's what happened. And so today's lawsuit asks the court to, number one, find that all of these irregularities are blatant violations of the Texas Election Code. And number two, we're asking for the court to enter an injunction that says to Harris County, never do this again. And only once we are able to pursue that relief can we have any confidence about the future. Now, I want to say one last thing. I believe that the evidence is going to demonstrate countless illegal acts by Administrator Tatum in this election. But I want to say to him and to Harris County, the actual governmental body, if you really believe that you didn't cheat, if you really believe that you didn't violate the law, then participate in the investigation, participate in the discovery that's going to happen. Don't try to hide, and don't file what is called a plea to the jurisdiction. The government does this all the time. They file a document that says, we're the government, we can't be held accountable in a court of law. We're asking you, Clifford Tatum, don't file that document. You may be able to run for a little while, but you can't hide forever. And eventually, we will be able to get the discovery, and then there will be a day of reckoning. It can either be quick or it can be slow. We have the resolve to go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary. I'm asking you, if you have nothing to hide, then don't hide.
I want to bring a couple comments as a former election official myself and a state official currently that I think are important for you to know and for the public to know. First off, during the day, election administrators have a tracking system. They know exactly how many people are at which poll because the law tells them to, and we've had a tracking system in Harris County for the better part of over a decade. So when, let's say, a Republican poll in an area that predominantly Republican got 1,200 pieces of paper, that would only be about 600 votes because there's 2 pieces per person. So they would already know under state law that they're running out of paper. And what I find abominable and unexplainable, and it can never happen again, is in the nation's 3rd largest county, we have an elections administration that won't or can't give out ballot paper to precincts so citizens can vote. And we have a young staffer here who was thrown out of Election Central because he went over and asked the question. And when he asked the question, they told him he had to leave or he was going to be guilty of trespass. So this is the type of environment that Cindy has been talking about, that Andy's been talking about. It's extremely hostile to transparency because for 4 hours, as best as anybody can tell, nobody was going to take care of getting paper to the polls. I've talked to my own presiding judge and others that had to beg for other polls to send them extra paper. We lost complete track of any chain of custody on ballots in this entire county because people were trying to do what they could do to make sure citizens could vote, because that's what democracy is all about. But that's what's being denied here. This isn't election denier, because I've got documents from the county that say there's more ballots than there are voters. We've got complaints that say voters were suppressed because they went to polls without being able to vote because government decided not to give them a ballot. Now, you've heard about Governor Abbott's call for an investigation into improprieties in Harris County, and that started. I've got a press release out supporting him because I have never in my life, and I've been around too long now, and I have never seen an election in a large county in America without enough ballots at polling places. Now, the Texas Secretary of State has just released a statement, and I've been authorized to read it to you. The Texas Secretary of State has received information regarding alleged improprieties in the conduct of election administration in Harris County last week. Under Section 31.006 of the Texas Election Code, our office has referred that information to the Attorney General's office and to the Harris County District Attorney's office for investigation. Simultaneously, Harris County is already subject to the next round of post-election audits required under Section 127.351 of the Texas Election Code, so we'll be collecting even more information to ultimately provide the public with greater clarity on the root causes of the issues witnessed in Harris County on Election Day. That was a bill called SB 1. That was the voter integrity bill. That was the bill that allowed for random audits, and it allowed for reconciliation documents, so we'd even know that as of the November the 9th, there were 6,409 more ballots than voters. So the state obviously has recognized the issue, but more importantly, the public has. I've never been more overwhelmed with complaints to me personally. I was standing outside a barbecue joint and I had 3 people drive up in cars and say thank you for trying to take this seriously, because they bounced off, one person bounced off many polls to finally vote. The public is enraged. They should be. This should never happen again. It shouldn't even happen at all. And how we have somebody that won't even speak to political parties or presiding judges about their problem and fix it. Because what gets measured gets fixed. If you're out of ballot paper, get more. This isn't rocket science, but it is to Clifford Tatum. And we're going to find out why. Because we've already seen, in my opinion, Class C and Class B misdemeanors broken, because that's in the code already about election supplies and not giving out those supplies or withholding them with purpose. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of legislation filed. And I suspect there's going to be election challenges. And there should be, because this can't happen again in America, Texas, or Harris County.
You know, for 2 years now, the Harris County Elections Office have blamed Republicans. They've said the Republicans are vote suppressionists. They said we're doing things that undermine people's faith in our elections. Well, guess who's to blame? It's never been us. It's been them each time. The Harris County Elections Office suppressed votes. And even worse, they've called into question the trust in our elections. And they're going to tell you that they're fixing it, or they had everything under control. And the truth is, again, they're the arsonist and the firemen. They can't be trusted. Senator Betancourt's right. We're going to have to look at legislation to fix these things. Hopefully, people will go to jail as they should. I don't have that much faith in the Harris County DA's office, but Kim Ogg, if you're listening, you've got a job to do. Some people need to go to jail.
Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Hi, so do you feel like the governor is asking, the Secretary of State to investigate, but isn't this redundant, because the Secretary of State is already doing an audit into Harris County election?
Do you want to answer?
For this summer.
It's an important distinction, because the governor's press release said the Texas Rangers and the Secretary of State. I actually had a bill on that last session so that the Secretary of State could call the Rangers in. So they're bringing in law enforcement combined with the Secretary of State's office and the Forensic Audit Division to do the investigation. Andy?
Sure. I'll just give you an example. It's a criminal offense to publicly issue early voting election returns before all of the votes have been cast during early voting or on election day. That makes sense. We don't want to have sort of a free look at how the election is going before we've actually cast our ballot, because that can influence how people vote. It can cause somebody to say, well, that race is lost, I'm not even gonna vote, and they turn around and leave. So there are criminal consequences for publicly disseminating vote totals before the vote is finished. Well, guess what? On election night, while they're in front of a judge on an emergency basis asking to allow voters to vote for 1 extra hour, Before that hour of voting was finished, guess what? Clifford Tatum and Harris County, they issued the election vote totals for early voting. That's illegal. That is a criminal violation. And so that is just one example of why people like the Texas Rangers are going to be conducting an investigation. And that is far different than simply the Secretary of State conducting an audit. The audit is what does the paper show. A criminal investigation is what did people do. And I believe that it's in the public's best interest to get to the bottom of what Clifford Tatum did.
Isn't it true that Tatum was fired in D.C. for a similar kind of complaint and brought to Harris County?
Somebody want to answer that?
Deliver what he was hired to do?
That's my understanding, that Cliff Tatum had the same sort of problems in other elections, and I think it was reported in the media, in other elections in other states where he was in charge of the elections. Other questions?
Yeah, for Senator Beck, on his first day of filing bills, you mentioned potential legislation. Anything that we've seen so far that you think specific from this election needs to be addressed at the state level with legislation?
Well, there's the bill that I had filed in the 87th legislature. I'm going from memory. I think it's 1589. That allowed the Secretary of State to be able to have Texas Ranger capability and call them into an investigation. So this would be something that the Secretary of State could do without effectively an executive order. There's going to be lots of discussions because my colleague and I have had a brief discussion. How do you legislate common sense of making sure that you've got a warehouse full of ballots and you've got people screaming their heads off at 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, yet you will basically go into a stall game for 4 or 5 hours and not give them their ballots? I don't know how to do that. I do know how to raise the penalties from Class C and Class B misdemeanors to Class B and A and state jail felonies if that's what it's going to take to get people's attention. But we've already got one of those bills filed today, and I expect, like last session, I'll have multiples. You go ahead, take it.
Well, first, I think we need to dig beyond Cliff Tatum. I think that there's a management team that's been in place for the last couple years. I think that that's part of our problem, and I'm a big believer in shining the light on this. I think we need to get to the bottom of it, find out why in Harris County we continue to have these problems. Why do we have machines that don't work? Why do we have polls that don't open on time? Why do we have machines that are not hooked up right, or the scanner breaks? Other counties have used the HART machines. They have the same sort of scanners. They have 2-page ballots. They don't have that problem. Why are we not maintaining our equipment? I think the problem is pervasive. I think it is systemic. I think it's not just a case of, oh, well, this election administrator messed up, so we're going to get rid of he or she, and the same problems continue to happen. It's every election. Look at the problems that have occurred. The primary, May 7th, May 24th. Remember May 24th? They decided they were going to go out and pick up the ballots. Well, then we ask our judges, because the way the law is, the presiding judge is responsible to deliver the ballots to central count. They can appoint their alternate judge or an election clerk. Well, the county, not keeping with the spirit of the law, but technically what they did is they sent out county employees who would show up, and they would have that judge swear them in as a clerk. Now, is that really the spirit of what the law is trying to accomplish? It wants to preserve the integrity of your ballot. It wants to make sure that there's a chain of custody every step of the way. So we've got to shine the light on this once and for all. And as I was saying in the spring, I am thrilled that the Secretary of State, the Attorney General's office, that the governor believes that this is serious enough, that we need to do the right thing so that we can make sure that people know when you go to vote, you're going to be able to walk into a poll at 7 a.m., you're going to be able to go and check in and go to what they call a duo, the voting machine, record your vote, and scan it in. And know that it's going to safely, securely get to central count, and it'll be counted. This hurts all of us. This is not a partisan issue. It hurts all of us. You know, we mentioned the Republican polls. Well, we have countywide voting. That means that those Republican polls where we were running out of paper, I am sure that there are independents and Democrats that were trying to vote there too that didn't get to vote. We have complaints after complaint. Our phones have been flooded. I know our local elected officials, their phones have been flooded. You know, people are complaining. We're sending them to the Secretary of State. But this is so important to our democracy to know that the elections are going to work. And Mr. Tatum, I think he was on the front page of the Chronicle yesterday saying that these elections, they ran fine. What is he trying to do now? He's calling all of our judges and trying to get them to admit that they had enough paper or that they called the wrong number. And I think that's called CYA.
Let me add real fast. To that last question, the bill has been refiled this session already about 40 minutes ago. It's called Senate Bill 2020, and that's the bill that allows embedded Texas Rangers to be part of a Secretary of State investigation. Thank you. Go ahead.
With the errors that took place, will that, one, affect how this election came out? And can that absolutely, can they forensically go back and match those ballots and find out what was what?
I'm going to let you.
What
I'm going to let the lawyer.
What shouldn't have been done, and you have record of every single person that cast a vote Tuesday night, last night.
There are folks in the public who think that the Harris County Republican Party can file a lawsuit and require a new election. That is not correct. The Texas Election Code does not give a political party that power. The only individuals who can seek a new election are those that were candidates on the ballot. And the candidates that would likely file an election contest are the ones who just came up short by a few votes. I've been handling election contests for 35 years. I was President Bush's lawyer in the Florida recount. I can tell you in my entire career, I've never seen a case where an election contest is more viable than this election right here in Harris County, I'm sad to say. We have tens of thousands of votes that you can't actually know who they voted for because they were turned away, or there's a double count or some other irregularity. And so what happens is a purportedly defeated candidate will file an election challenge. That's not heard by a Harris County judge. By law, it's going to be heard by a judge outside of Harris County, so that that judge is not under any political pressure from the local folks. And that judge will call balls and strikes on whether or not ballots that were cast should have been counted and whether ballots that were not counted should have been counted. So you actually will change and subtract and add to the election counts. And at the end of the day, you either will know with certainty that the purported defeated candidate actually won, and so they'll flip the result and seat that person, or you cannot tell, which is my prediction. I believe that based on the evidence in this case, you cannot tell the true outcome of this race. You just can't ascertain it because there's so many mistakes. And so what the law says in that regard, new election. So any candidate who files and is able to show their burden of proof that you can't trust the outcome, they get a new election. It doesn't go up, doesn't go down the ballot. It's candidate by candidate.
Do you know if any of your Republican candidates will file for that?
I don't know at this point. I would just say this, if I were purportedly a defeated candidate and my margin of defeat is a few thousand votes, boy, I'd file, because this is low-hanging fruit, the way Cliff Tatum ran this thing.
Only if you will be defied?
I'm sorry?
Only if you will be defied, not if you will be defeated?
You have to be defeated based on the poll numbers at the end to be entitled to file this. Obviously, if you've won, you're not going to challenge the election. You're happy. So it's only somebody who has less votes than the other side that is statutorily allowed. This is something the legislature created. It's a very narrow thing. Not anybody can do this, only defeated candidates.
So we have countywide voting here in Harris County, so that means that you don't have to go vote at your exact polling location of your precinct. You can go somewhere else. And we have so many polling locations here, like some are within walking distance of each other. Do you have proof that there were a large number of people who went to vote? There was no paper, and they just didn't vote at all. And then, are there enough of those people that you found that would actually change the outcomes of any election?
Our investigation thus far has uncovered not hundreds, but thousands of registered voters who intended to vote on Election Day and were turned away. They were turned away so late in the game there wasn't enough time to go vote somewhere else. I also want to tell you something. Remember that emergency hearing I mentioned earlier where I sort of as an interloper just invited myself to participate? During that hearing, the other side, the plaintiffs who filed the case, and the county agreed with the judge that the argument that you could go somewhere else to vote was not a legal argument that was valid. They said we already are putting enough pressure on common, ordinary citizens to vote. We're not going to create literally a modern day poll tax and make somebody not be able to vote and then have to go somewhere else. They chastised that argument. It'll be very interesting to see in the case we just filed whether they're going to flip-flop or if they're going to stick to what they said. But we have a transcript of what they said, and we're going to hold them to their words. What we would like to do is get a legal finding that Harris County and its elections administrator, Tatum, violated the election code in multiple ways. That's goal number one. You violated the law. Goal number two is to protect the future of Harris County elections. We are asking in this lawsuit, order that this never happen again. So we want to restore trust in the voters of Harris County in the outcomes that get reported. This is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is an American and a Texan issue. We all should be unanimously in favor of trusting the outcome of an election.
So secondarily, could this nullify this whole election?
The defeated candidates, one by one, up the ballot, down the ballot, can make that pitch in a courtroom, but not us. We would if we could, but we're not allowed to under the laws that exist.
Are you able to provide any of the names? I know you said that there were thousands of people who bounced around the different polls. Were you not able to provide any names?
Well, we are continually taking that data and that information. We actually have had some of our presiding judges, I think, that have talked to the press on those situations, where they actually ran out of paper. The question was I'll tell you what I want. I want to know, and I think the only way we're going to get there is to have either the Secretary of State, some independent, or the court outside of Harris County that will provide oversight and ensure that we put the proper controls, the proper procedures. We have people that we can rely upon who are running the elections, that they'll run it fairly, securely, and by the law. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
You were just listening in there to Harris County officials as they were talking about this call for an investigation from the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. Of course, we're live, raw, and unfiltered, also here on Live Now from Fox. Here's a tweet from the Harris County Democrats as they are responding to this latest call for the investigation. Quote, our biggest concern about this is that Abbott and the other GOP state leaders are trying to criminalize election workers. These elections are run by volunteers who are civically engaged and actively participating in the political process. And under Abbott's watch, election workers have been constantly under attack. That's from the Harris County Democratic Party chair there. We're going to take a quick break here on Live Now from Fox. Welcome back into Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. This is a live look inside of Maricopa County, Arizona. We'll hear from a press conference from them within the next 15 or 20 minutes, hopefully, as they will continue to provide an update on that ballot counting process as they continue to count ballots here. Maricopa County continues to be in the spotlight, especially after 2020 and now 2022. The chair, Bill Gates, talked about patience, as it takes sometimes a week or so to count all the ballots, especially in a race that is so close as the governor race there is with Katie Hobbs, the Democrat, and also Republican Carrie Lake. So we will hopefully hear an update from them within the next 20 or so minutes as they continue on here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, here is a look what's at stake. Obviously, the balance of power still favoring the Democrats as they have the majority with 50 seats already. The only seat up for grabs still is that Georgia one, as the senator runoff will take place into December 6th. We're still also waiting on the House of Representatives, as that one still a little bit up for grabs, but leaning toward the red, leaning toward the Republicans right now. We want to go back out to the Senate floor from earlier, and hear from their Texas senator from earlier today here on Live Now from Fox before we get into some more of those live press conferences here. So let's listen in to the Senate floor.
Election day has come and gone, but there's still quite a bit of uncertainty about what the next Congress will look like, particularly in the House of Representatives. As final ballots are being counted in a number of states, there's a lot we still don't know, but here's what we do know. We know that Democrats will maintain a razor-thin majority in the Senate, and I emphasize razor-thin. In a few weeks, Georgia voters will head back to the polls to determine whether Democrats will hold 50 or 51 seats. We won't know the result of that race until December the 6th at the earliest. Now, suffice it to say, this is not the result I would have hoped for. Like all of my colleagues, I've heard firsthand about the pain and frustration families have felt due to Democrat policies. Their runaway spending habits have fueled inflation. Their open border policies have ushered in the largest migration crisis we've ever witnessed. The epidemic of fentanyl deaths is compounded by the Biden and Democratic open border policies. Their anti-police, soft-on-crime rhetoric has harmed public safety. And their detached from reality energy policies have sent gas prices soaring and undermined our national security. Best I can tell, our Democratic colleagues still don't have a plan to address any of those issues. It's become an exercise in finger-pointing, and the latest scapegoat is now the former Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, Chris Magnus. Even the Biden White House and congressional Democrats, even if they did have a plan, it doesn't look like there's much appetite for action. If Republicans had won the majority, these issues would have been at the top of our list. But unfortunately, we came up short this time. I know many of my Republican colleagues are eager to have a frank discussion about the path forward for our party, and it's essential that we do so. We need to ensure that in 2 years, our policies and our message will resonate with the voters. So I agree with the need to have a frank, meaningful conversation, debate even. We shouldn't be afraid of spirited debate in the United States Senate, after all. Debate about what our message should be and what our priorities should look like. That is essential. Those discussions will begin tomorrow, and I hope there will be plenty of time to listen to one another and then to work toward consensus on a clear, concise, and impactful plan of action. In terms of what to expect from our Democratic colleagues, I don't expect much to change. Given that Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, given their strong support for the 60-vote threshold for the Senate to act, I believe that will remain firmly intact. If the majority leader tries to go nuclear, as he's threatened to do time and time again, and blow up the rules of the Senate, he simply doesn't have the votes. That's the good news. There'll be no Green New Deal. There'll be no court packing, no D.C. statehood, no mass amnesties. Republicans, maybe with some Democrat support, will block the most radical aspects of the agenda for progressives in the Democratic Party. And we'll continue to fight the irresponsible spending and government overreach our colleagues have pushed for the last 2 years. Instead, we'll push for common sense policies to bring down the costs and improve the standard of living for working families. We'll work to increase domestic energy production rather than go hat in hand to autocrats in the Middle East. And we will secure the border. I hope we can do this through bipartisan progress. These are the top issues facing families across the country, and they deserve our attention, and more than that, they deserve our action here in the Senate. Unfortunately, it's not just the Senate that's in a bit of a holding pattern. Several House races have yet to be called, and it's not clear which party will hold the majority. Republicans have a lead right now, and I'm optimistic that that's where things will end up in the House. A Republican majority in the House would force our Democratic colleagues to abandon partisan governance, which has dominated in the last 2 years, as they've held the White House, they've held the House, and then had a working majority in the Senate. But now Democrats would no longer be able to abuse the budget reconciliation process to circumvent the normal legislative process. They'd be forced to work in earnest to find common ground, which is what the American people, I believe, clearly want. Again, we're all eager for the ballot counting to conclude. It's been nearly a week since Election Day, and everyone's eager to have a final roster for the 218th Congress. And while there's a lot we still don't know, there are some exciting things we do know. The Senate will welcome at least 5 new Republicans at the start of next year. Katie Britt, Ted Budd, Mark Wayne Mullen, Eric Schmidt, and J.D. Vance will join the ranks of the Republican conference. Each of these individuals is coming to Washington with a fresh perspective, right off of the campaign trail, and a long list of ideas to improve the lives of folks in their state and across America. While I'm sad to see our retiring colleagues go, I'm eager to welcome this new blood, this new energy, and these new ideas into the Senate. There are also some new faces joining the Texas delegation. Given the explosive population growth in our state, we've added 2 new House seats this cycle, bringing the total to 38 House members from the great state of Texas. Next Congress will welcome 5 new Texas Republicans in the House, and I'm eager to work with these men and women to solve some of the biggest issues our families in our state are facing. But if the truth be known, Madam President, I'm happy to work with anybody who shares my interest in trying to make life a little bit better and to address the critical issues facing American families today. Which brings me to my next topic, the National Defense Authorization Act. While we wait for the final ballots to be tallied and runoffs to be held, there's still work to be done here in the Senate. The first item on the agenda should be the National Defense Authorization Act. To be frank, I don't know why this is still outstanding, why we haven't acted as we have, I believe, for 61 years in a row, passing a National Defense Authorization Act, given its importance to the safety and security of our nation. Thanks to the bipartisan leadership of Senator Reid and Senator Inhofe and our colleagues on the Armed Services Committee, they completed their work in the Senate Armed Services Committee last summer. But the Defense Authorization Act has just lingered on the Senate's agenda without any action by the majority leader, the senator from New York. Thanks to bipartisan leadership on the Senate Armed Services Committee, they've compiled a strong bill that will strengthen and modernize our national defense. But that bill was filed on July 18th, last summer. In the meantime, nothing has happened here on the floor of the Senate, now 4 months later. The majority leader has so far refused to provide floor time for the defense authorization bill. This isn't a matter of scheduling. The Senate's had plenty of time to work on the defense bill in September, and there was certainly bipartisan appetite to get that done. But the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Schumer, the senator from New York, could not be swayed. He hasn't prioritized our national defense, which I believe is the single most important duty of the members of Congress. Given our global risks, this should be our #1 priority. Day after day, Russia continues its unjustified assault on Ukraine. As it tries to find friends on the global stage, it's cozying up to Iran. At the same time, the Chinese Communist Party has become increasingly hostile to the West, and its threats against the people of Taiwan are as strong as ever. North Korea has declared itself a nuclear weapons state. The global threat landscape is evolving at a pace we haven't seen in a long time. We need a strong National Defense Authorization Act that gives our commanders the predictability they need to plan and to prepare for the future, and hopefully to deter military conflict, what Ronald Reagan called peace through strength. It's completely baffling to me that the majority leader has put the National Defense Authorization Act at the very bottom of his to-do list. Radical nominees can wait. Our national defense must be the top priority, and I hope he'll put this bill on the floor soon. Senators on both sides of the aisle, as I mentioned, the Defense Authorization Bill is a bipartisan bill that came out of the Senate Armed Services Committee that was filed July 18th, last summer, and nothing has happened on the floor of the Senate since then. And there's one person who can change that, and that's the Democrat Majority Leader, Senator Schumer. I hope he will decide finally to get this bill on the floor. Once the Defense Authorization Bill passes the Senate, we still have to keep the lights on. We have a continuing resolution that expires December the 16th. We have just over a month until the current stopgap spending measure expires, and a government shutdown is the last thing our country needs. Given the fact that this is the end of Democrats' unified government, where they have majorities in the House and the Senate and the White House, I worry that our colleagues will try to weigh this down with tons of partisan freight, sweetheart deals, and earmarks. I'm afraid they'll include every remaining item from the far left's Christmas wish list and turn a critical funding bill into a Christmas tree. This bill should be clean of poison pills as much as humanly possible. This is not the place to cash in on political chits. There's far too much on the line. Like all of our colleagues, I am eager to have more clarity on the makeup of the 118th Congress, but we have work to do before the end of the 117th Congress, and I, for one, am ready to get to work. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum. President, Election Day has come and gone, but there's still quite a bit of uncertainty about what the next Congress will look like, particularly in the House of Representatives. As final ballots are being counted in a number of states, there's a lot we still don't know, but here's what we do know. We know that Democrats will maintain a razor-thin majority in the Senate, and I emphasize—
You were just listening in there to the senator out of Texas on this Senate floor providing an update. Of course, we're going to take you out to Maricopa County as soon as the step to the podium there. Chairman Bill Gates will provide an update as they're slowly finishing off counting all of those ballots in Maricopa County. We will take it to you live here as soon as it happens. Should happen within the next few minutes or so. Until then, we're going to stick with some current senators on the floor. Here's Marsha Blackburn from earlier today as we continue to wait on Maricopa County. So here's Marsha Blackburn from earlier.
President?
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam President. Are we in a quorum call?
Yes, we are.
I ask that we suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that the following interns and fellows in my office be granted 4 privileges for the remainder of this Congress. Jackson Hoppy, David Park, Martin Olliman, Surgeon Semenovic.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to begin by welcoming the Tennessee National Guard's 268th Military Police Company home after a 305-day deployment to Africa. We are so incredibly grateful for their service and for the service and sacrifice that their families make during these times of deployment. And I know I speak for every Tennessean when I say to them, welcome home, job well done. Well, the Senate is back in session, and all anyone back in Tennessee wants to know is, what will this chamber get done next? What is it that the Democrats are going to push next? And they're not feeling very optimistic right now. One thing is clear, and that is that my Democratic colleagues have completely ignored the stress that they're causing Tennessee service members and their families by dangling the NDAA in front of them and then snatching it away. Inaction sends a very powerful message, and right now all they're hearing is that the military has become a political football, and that does not inspire confidence. We have passed the Defense Authorization Act 61 years in a row. And I am confident that there will be bipartisan support for number 62, which makes this tight timeline even more unnecessary. The American people don't have all the details on what this authorization will do, but they don't need them to know that it's the only thing standing between us and getting steamrolled by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and the new axis of evil, which is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Our service members might not know every line item in the 2,000 pages of the bill, but they know that its contents will determine the course of their lives for the next 5, 10, or 25 years. Passing this bill is the bare minimum as far as the Senate is concerned, but it means a lot to our men and women in uniform. Madam President, we're ready to get this thing done. I know that you, as a member of the Armed Services Committee who has worked so hard on this, you join me in being ready to get it done. We finished our committee work back in June on this bill. We considered more than 400 amendments. We adopted about 200.
Out there, but I'll just recap the week for you. Actually, let me start in a different place. I heard some chatter today from some folks who have a platform and their voices are heard, and they're saying things that are disappointing, negative things, criticizing Arizona because of the process and the time frame related to this election. I want to tell you what I've seen in the last week. I have seen people at the polls who are excited about the opportunity to actually participate in this process, working long hours, coming in early and working late because they want to make sure that this election is free and fair. I have seen employees in the recorder's office who show up here and initially had concerns over safety, and all they do is express gratitude, and they go into these rooms and they grind it out every day trying to count millions of votes. I have seen elected officials like the recorder and the chairman here when the sun is coming up and long after the sun has gone down. And I have seen the looks on their face when there were challenges and concerns, and I've seen the commitment and dedication as they work through those. And I'll even talk about the folks out front today, and they were out front the other day, and aside from maybe a few expletives and other choice words, peaceful, expressing their First Amendment right, expressing their concern over the circumstances, but abiding by the law and being respectful for the most part. So if you're saying Arizona is a bad place and that we're so terrible because it's taken a week or so to come to an end of an election, I think you better look in the mirror, because Arizona is an exceptional place. Maricopa County is incredible, and the people here have done a phenomenal job. So I get the chance to speak to you, so I'm going to speak from the heart on some things. I think it needs to be heard and needs to be said. There are good people involved in this process, and I'm confident in the outcome. So if you are not, if you have issues, do not confuse your intentions with your actions, meaning you may be well-intended, but if your actions are criminal, that line still stands exactly where it was. It hasn't moved. If you believe there's ways to do it better, then find the process to make that help accomplish that, do it the right way. But if you do it the wrong way, then there's a lot of deputies out there who've been working hard for the last week. They prefer not to see you cross the line, but if you do, they'll hold you accountable. I really don't have much else to say other than thank you for your patience and the work that you've done in covering this. I know we're coming to a conclusion pretty quickly here. Looking forward to those who have been elected leading the state in the right direction, and hopefully it'll be about collaboration and not division. Any questions? Actually, I hand it to you. Any questions? How do you want to do this, Phil?
The tender.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheriff Penzone, again. On behalf of all my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors, we are so grateful to you, your team, and all of law enforcement for the incredible job they're doing to allow democracy to continue to work. And that's exactly what's going on here behind us and what's been going on for the last week. So give you guys some information. This evening, some point after 6 o'clock, we will have our last big drop of votes. We'll have, we have less than 100,000 left. This will be a big drop of votes. And I want to say something right now, which is what we do here is we count the votes and we report the votes. We don't call races. Those of you in the media call races. We don't do that. We're not going to do that tonight. And the only time you're going to hear from the Board of Supervisors speaking as a group of 5 is right after Thanksgiving. We will hold a vote on a canvass, and we will vote on whether to accept the canvass of the vote in all the races in Maricopa County. But we're not going to call winners or anything like that. Tonight, we will have the late earlies from Election Day. We're going to have all those will be reported, with the exception of a few that need to be cured. And let me talk about curing a little bit, because we haven't done that. So we cure, this is when, again, these early ballots come in, and for some reason, all the folks that are doing this hard, tedious, but important work of comparing the signatures on the outside of the ballot envelope to the signatures that we have in the voter registration that the recorder's office has, compare those, and if there's a problem, these don't look like they match, there are questions, then we go about the curing process. So the team from the recorder's office will reach out to folks, contact them, say, there's a problem here, can you help us? Can you provide additional information to give us a level of comfort and security that you in fact filled this ballot out? And this came home to the Gates family earlier this year. So our 19-year-old daughter, she was voting for the first time in August, and she got one of these calls. So clearly her penmanship she's taking after her father. But they contacted her, and she was able to cure it, and then her vote counted. So this is such an important piece of the process. Like I said, we haven't really talked about it now, but now we're starting to get into those, and I know the political parties are focused on that, and they should be. That's great. So they're reaching out to their folks to make sure that they can address this, but also we're doing it proactively. The recorder's office is doing it proactively to make sure that these are cured. There has been a lot of, some people concerned about whether their ballot has been counted or not, and we would encourage folks here in Maricopa County to go to BeBallotReady.vote, and they can go on there to see if their ballot has been counted. Now, there's been a lot of chatter about people going to that website, and they're looking to see if their vote was counted, and they believe that it's indicating that their vote wasn't counted, but that may not be the case. A lot of these people are voting, they're clicking on voter history, okay? Voter history is what's happened in the past. That's not updated for this year. You need to click on ballot status to find out whether your votes have been counted, so for people who are interested in that. So again, last big drop tonight. So what's going to be left after tonight? A few things. First of all, any additional early ballot envelopes that are cured. So as they get cured, then they're sent over here to be tabulated. Also, any provisional ballots that get cured. And one example, there's a few examples, but one of the examples is the conditional provisional. That's when you go to vote and you go to vote in person and you forgot your driver's license. You're allowed to vote a provisional ballot, and then under Arizona law, you have 5 business days to get your ID in here so that that vote can be counted. Again, we've had a long history here of requiring voter ID, and that continues under Arizona law. The other thing is the folks back here are working on those box 3, continuing to work through the few thousand box 3 ballots that are left. And, we'll have hopefully some of those tonight and then some more in the coming days. And then the final one, and we haven't mentioned this one yet either, is the hand tally of Legislative District 22. So in Legislative District 22, the candidate, the incumbent, announced that he wasn't going to be running after all, too late after we had already printed the ballots. So as a result, that's an all write-in race. And so if you have handwriting on the ballot, then that leads to adjudication. And so we have to go through all those and do a hand tally of all the votes in LD 22. So that's another one. You're going to see those coming out in the days ahead. And all those different categories that I just went through with you, after we release the results tonight, we'll provide a full rundown of the numbers that we have in each one of those categories. Again, but that will be after tonight's ballot drop. So with that, I'll turn it to Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are any questions? Sasha.
I've got 2 questions. One is for the sheriff and one is for the chairman. Who wants to go first?
Let's talk to the sheriff first.
Okay, Sheriff. I'm wondering, Steve Bannon was saying online that people can't let Arizona certify this election, and I'm wondering with that if you have any security concerns around certification, which I believe is currently scheduled for after Thanksgiving in the county.
Who's that?
Steve Bannon.
Is he an Arizona resident?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty confident in the team that we have here, and we will, as always, abide by the law and expect everybody else to abide by the law also. As I stated earlier, a lot of folks like to point fingers and make accusations and criticisms, and it's usually those who don't put the hard work in that is necessary to carry out these tasks. So everybody's got an opinion. Not everybody's responsible, and those who are going to do an exceptional job, and I'm not concerned at all about his opinion or others that feel that way.
And then, Sherman, I'm wondering, do you expect that we would know tonight whether there will be an automatic recount for some of the big statewide races that remain undecided?
So what I would say is we may have a better sense, but like I said, there's going to be further votes that are going to be coming in after. It's not like these are the last numbers that we're going to report, but probably start to get a better idea of that. And again, with the automatic recount, that's going to happen in December. So obviously there's plenty of time to determine whether we will have the automatic recounts. The folks are ready for this. This is a change in the law that's going to make it more likely that we do have automatic recounts. There was a change in the law from the state legislature earlier this year to put us in that position. Again, this team is ready to deal with that and do their statutory duty.
Yeah, for the chairman, can we get an update on the hand count and how the audit and how that's been going?
So the hand count audit was completed yesterday, and we can probably, Megan may even be able to provide some additional color on this, but it went very well. It turned out excellent. A couple little issues here and there that we can give you some details on. But again, fantastic work by the folks who came in to do the hand count, and absolutely, again, established and reiterated the fact that these machines work. They're effective, and that they're the best way to count votes.
And then one more question for you. Again, the chatter online seems to have been building a bit today. A lot of questions around box 3. A couple of allegations I'm hoping that you can just address. One is folks alleging that there must be far more than 17,000. They were overflowing at particular locations, being put into Tupperware or unsecure places. And then the other is people questioning why we haven't seen results from box 3 in the past couple of days.
Okay. So first of all, I'm not aware of any box 3 ballots being put in Tupperware. They've been handled securely throughout, so I can confirm no Tupperware unless anyone knows of something to the contrary. The last box 3 results were when, Megan?
It was a few days ago.
Okay. Yeah, it was a few days ago. We're working through, we're processing them, as I just mentioned. We should see more of those. There's a reconciliation process that has to go through, and that's exactly what's happening. Again, this is the people that get frustrated or get impatient. It's because we're doing everything to make sure that these are eligible votes. So I don't understand that. I think a lot of these people who get impatient are those who have been advocates of security, of making sure that only eligible votes are counted. And finally, with respect to the 17,000, I don't know why people wouldn't accept that number. I mean that is just puzzling to me. So I really don't have a response to that.
And Megan will come up and answer a little bit more of your question about where we're at in that process.
My name's Megan Gilbertson. I'm the Communications Director with the Maricopa County Elections Department. So the reason why we haven't put any more results out for those Election Day ballots is because we wanted to get the public as many of those early ballot drop-offs as possible. And so for us, it was a larger portion, and so that's what we were putting through. The team is working here with observers present through the rest of those Election Day ballots from door 3. And the other thing I would add on the 17,000 is we know what that number is because we know the number of voters that checked in on Election Day, and that is subtracted then from the number of votes that we counted on the Election Day tabulators. And so that is our full universe of the number of voters in that category.
Are they all still counting and reading through the tabulation?
Yes, so it does look like the majority of them are being read through by the tabulation equipment. But one thing that we have seen a little bit higher is it looks like voters were using check marks instead of ovals. And it looks like they might have been using those check marks with a thinner pen than what we provide in the polling location, such as a ballpoint pen. And so because of that, that has to go to our bipartisan adjudication boards because the oval isn't fully filled in. And so in order to mark that as a vote for those candidates, the bipartisan board would agree that yes, that was a check mark, and then award those votes. So that's what we're seeing so far with them.
Can I just ask just about that? Is that the Election Day one? Is that, I'm going off yesterday's press release, is that the first line 5,000 of the estimated Election Day ballots to be reported? That's the box 13.
That's the box 3. Yes, that's the left to be reported.
So then, if all of the Election Day, the mail-in return on Election Day are dropped off, then we're talking about about 1,300 left beyond everything else you're reporting today.
So we're going to provide a full accounting. Yeah, we're going to provide a full accounting of the number of ballots left tonight after we report results, because that's how we know how many ballots have been counted today. You can see our teams are still working hard to provide the results out tonight.
But is it fair to say that if you're reporting all of those mail-ins that were dropped off on Election Day based off the last press release, that's about 73,000?
So we're reporting the majority of those mail-ins unless any of them need to be cured.
Let's go to Jim. Okay.
So still, and maybe this is still for Megan, I don't know, but just to clarify, two related questions on box 3. Or the ballots themselves. You talked about the pens, the the ink was too thin or whatever. So there were pens in the actual centers that you wanted voters to use, and was that because some voters brought their own pens? Did you recommend against using their own pens?
Well, I think we made it very clear, even a month ago when we started doing press conferences in early October, that we were recommending using fast-drying felt-tip pens on Election Day, and we provided fast-drying felt-tip pens. I mean, Pentel was the brand that we purchased, but those fast-drying felt-tip pens were what we recommended. But we know some people want to bring their own pen. We also know that some people were spreading that you should only use a blue ballpoint pen on social media. To what end, I'm not sure,
So
other
that
than...
ballpoint pen advice, was that kind of counter to what you all were recommending here for using those ballots?
That's correct, and I mean, I think people remember back to the primary, a lot of people spilled some ink on, pun intended, on the pen story, but yeah, we recommended that, and that was mostly because we were concerned about the smudging on the tabulators there at the vote centers. We, not sure that that was really the issue this time, but we have noticed through the adjudication process, as Megan said, a number of people were using check marks, and the machine's not going to read that. Therefore, many of those ended up in box 3, and that's what's being accounted for now.
So on this topic, just in terms of the way that box 3 works, because I do believe this is going to come up and it's floating around online. There are many videos of voters talking about their frustrations, that they were trying to get their ballots registered in the tabulation machines. They tried. What was the sort of ceiling number of attempts before they could use slot 3, or could anyone use slot 3 at any time with their ballot? Like, how does that process work?
I'm not sure if Megan wants... Yeah, I had not heard of a ceiling number, and she just confirmed there is no ceiling on how many attempts. Of course, we had a lot of poll workers in various capacities at the polls, and they were doing their best to help people with this process. And I've heard numbers thrown out, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times. I don't know if that's really the case, but they were trying to allow people enough time so that the tabulator would read it. But as we said, if they'd only put check marks on there, or they put or used a really light blue pen, pens come in every single color under the sun. So if they'd used something real light, perhaps that optical scanner wasn't going to read it.
But they could have used slot 3 at any time after one try or after no tries. Like, what was the...
I think the chairman will jump in. We've talked a lot about box 3 and how that's used across the state.
Yeah, no. So this is the thing, and I've been quiet about this, but I understand that a lot's been said about box 3, and a lot of blame has been put on Maricopa County for the lines and things like that. We were very clear here early on Tuesday morning, many of you were here, that as this issue started to come about, we let people know box 3 is absolutely an option for people who don't want to try and continue to put the ballot through the tabulator. Box 3 is a safe and secure way to have your vote counted. Everyone's vote will be counted that goes into box 3. And unfortunately, as we've had a little bit of time now to look back at what was going on out there, we had a lot of people from, a lot of leaders in one of the political parties that was literally going out there and saying the absolute opposite to their voters. And here's, some of you may have seen this graphic that was out there. And this graphic was tweeted out by multiple members of one of the political parties. And this is what I want to focus on. This line, it says, "Do not put your ballot in box 3 or drawer 3. This was literally the opposite of what Recorder Richer and I were telling people. It's the opposite of what our comms team was telling everyone. And so guess what? A lot of people were coming. I've talked to Scott Jarrett about this. Scott Jarrett has said people were coming, they were afraid to put their ballot in box 3 because of what the leaders of their party had told them, which was the complete opposite of what we had told them. And you know what happened as a result of this? Our folks who were running the check-ins at those vote centers, they were being pulled off of checking people in, and now they were having to, and Scott Jarrett is a very caring man. He said, they're over there consoling these voters, right? These voters, because of what they've been told, they don't know what to do, and they were trying to work with them. So that was pulling people off of the check-in, our poll workers, so that was extending the lines. Again, I've been very patient. I haven't pointed the finger at leaders of one of the parties, but this shows that leaders of one of the parties were spreading misinformation about Box 3. And so I just want to make sure that that was clear for the record.
Chairman, a technical question over here about the LD22
Yes.
ballots. I imagine there might be some folks in LD22 who just didn't vote in the write-in race at all. But for those who did, have the rest of their ballots been tabulated and now just that race will be counted by hand, or is everything on that ballot?
Yeah, I'm going to go to Megan on this technical question.
Yes, the rest of their ballot has been counted. That's the great thing about electronic adjudication, is that it'll only look at the single contest in question. So we'll be able to come back to all of those undervotes and votes for that contest and be able to do that hand tally just for that race, but all of the other ones have been counted. The other thing that I would add, if it's okay, is what the chairman was talking about at one of our voting locations. We had 150 people in line, and they weren't in line outside of the voting location. They were in line inside of the voting location. The poll workers were consoling them, letting them know, letting them put their ballot through 10, 20 times into the precinct-based tabulator, because they were told that the box and the door 3 would not count. And so our poll workers were working through with those voters, giving them all of the options they can inside of their voting locations, because they wanted to make sure that those voters had the ability to put their ballots through that tabulator, but also so they could know that when it comes back, it will be counted here. And what we've shown is they are being counted here with observers present under our cameras. They are being counted, and we are reporting those out. So our poll workers were having some of the most difficult conversations because voters were afraid. And not because we weren't providing them the information, but because there was so much misinformation out there about what type of ballot would count. And for us here at the Elections Department, if you are a valid voter that provided your proof of ID, we want to count your ballot. It doesn't matter what party it is. And all of our poll workers were there to support those voters on Election Day. And they were there all day long, all evening, helping voters through that process.
Yeah, I have a question for the sheriff, because at the beginning you said that you increased security, but it wasn't for any particular event. Two questions. Is it related at all to the fact that we could be getting close to a call in the governor's race? And also, will this increased security remain until after the call is made?
Absolutely. When we look at it, we try to figure out, how do we allocate resources at the times that we can project may be most significant just due to circumstances. So on Election Day is when people are most emotional, and we knew there was going to be activity, and right now, and I don't know how many votes are left or when those will all be unfolded, but I think we're getting close to end game, so I want to make sure that we are prepared, because a big part of our plan has been help good people be good. If you see that this is not a place where it's appropriate to come and create unrest, then you're less likely to put yourself in harm's way or others. So we're gonna heighten the level. We're gonna stay committed through until we feel as though this election has concluded. People will have those who are willing to accept the outcomes, and that peace will be the word of the day for Arizona as it relates to elections.
Sheriff, what's your message to the public? I mean, some people will like the results, some people will not like the results. What's your message to the public, whether you like them or not, whether you believe in the counting, don't believe in the counting? What are you hoping for once these results come in the next couple of days?
I think if you truly believe in our nation and our foundation and our principles, then you recognize that elections, not everybody is a winner, not everybody is happy on that day, but it is a part of who we are, that we respect the opportunities for everyone, that elections are designed so that the majority have the say who's going to be in leadership, and if you're not on the successful end of that conversation, then you work towards the next election if you want to see change. But if you have a different opinion, such as I know the question you asked earlier about someone from outside the state trying to create unrest here, this is Arizona. Okay, this is for Arizona residents. This is an Arizona community. We'll pick our leaders, and not everybody may be pleased with it, but we are going to lead by example. So my advice to you is be a better person today than you were yesterday, and work to be even better tomorrow. And if you want to see change in leadership, work within the system to get it done. But if you get outside the lines, then unfortunately you cross some of my folks, and it becomes a different outcome. But I want to ask you to be respectful to the men and women out there wearing the uniforms, and I want to express gratitude to Phoenix PD and Scottsdale and DPS and the others that helped us out. If you don't have love and affection for people in uniform trying to keep you safe, then you don't even know what love and affection is. So be respectful and don't put them in harm's way. Don't put these people in here in harm's way. The outcome will be the outcome, and I'm confident it will be a true outcome.
For the sheriff?
No. So I apologize if I want to take you lead, but if you have them for me, can I just wrap them up and be out, and then the chairman will come up here and knock the rest of them out, but instead of us going back and forth and getting our steps in, anybody else have questions for me? Okay, going once, going twice. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Supervisors, I was just going to ask, there's some big voices kind of trying to set up an election integrity line, asking for those who had issues on election day voting, whether they had used Dropbox 3, whether they saw long lines, felt like they were turned away, to call them. Do you think that, or worry that this would in essence set the groundwork for lawsuits?
I'm not concerned about that at all, because when I was a Republican lawyer, I did, we set those lines up to get that information in. That's absolutely, any organization's right to do that, whether it's one of the political parties. And again, if there are issues, I said this in the primary, I'll say it again now. If there are concerns, things that people saw that raised concerns for them, let us know. Call us. A lot of these people are my friends. A lot of these people have my cell number. These lawyers, Republican lawyers, call me. And, we'll take a look at that, see what can be done. But no, I have no problem with that at all.
And just following up to Bianca's question, I believe it was about, Carrie Lang saying that make sure your votes are counted, or maybe you touched on it at the beginning, excuse me, saying that maybe people were looking at their voter history. For those who weren't in the voter history section and they feel like their vote was not counted, what would you say to them if they're not seeing it?
Yeah, no, we would welcome them to call in to us. Be happy to look into that, research that for them. Again, we're here. We want to make sure that every valid vote is counted, every eligible vote is counted, and we've got we have the Star Center, which you may have heard of, which is a call center to deal with these things. So again, we encourage people to reach out to us on however they want to, phone calls, social media, whatever. We are very much focused on customer service at Maricopa County, and we want to help these folks.
A follow-up to that question, for those who checked on the right section for their vote to be counted and it was not counted and they feel like it's not being counted, have you received such a thing, such a complaint?
I've heard of that. That's when
directly through that center.
I think so. Yeah, definitely through that center. That's one of the reasons why I addressed it, was that people who are having, they're clicking on the wrong thing. But I don't recall. I haven't had a direct communication with someone like to my cell phone who had that issue.
One more question, maybe two?
I've heard some language from you today. You talked about misinformation. The Twitter account from the county put out a tweet addressed to disinformation spreaders earlier. I could be wrong, but I sense some stronger criticism coming from you and your colleagues towards these individuals over the course of this week. Can you tell me, is that what you intended, and if so, why?
Do I tend to be stronger in my response to disinformation? Well, I think as the days go on here, as we near the end, as things tend to kind of, build up a little bit, as others, folks from, as the sheriff said, folks from outside of the state say that this, vote should not be canvassed, things like that. We want to make sure that there's good information out there, and we want to also, look, this isn't even about 2022. This is about how people view elections in 2024, in 2026, in 2050. We know that we're all here, all of us elected officials, we're here for a very short period of time. And there's a sacred trust that is placed in our hands. And what my colleagues and I are focused on, obviously this election, counting these votes, but we're also thinking about the future and what we can do to rebuild confidence in those who've had their confidence shaken because people who they believe in, leaders in their own party, sadly, have spread misinformation. We got a lot of cameras here. It's an opportunity for us to speak about this misinformation. And then we know that people watch all of your programs and will hopefully think about that. You know what, maybe I should look into this a little bit more. Maybe I should go on to BeBallotReady.vote. Maybe I should go on to JustTheFacts.vote. The people who've done that, they said, man, I had no idea. I ran into one of my neighbors this morning. I was walking the dogs, and he had a couple questions for me. I answered it. He goes, oh, okay, now that makes sense. Okay, well, I can't run into everybody when I'm out walking my dogs, but that's kind of the equivalent, right? And so when we have these opportunities, we want people to think just for a moment, maybe I should go on, maybe I should go out and find the facts. And for people to have been told that box 3 was not a safe place to go, not a safe place to put their votes, that those votes would not be counted. And then that led to some of the chaos on Tuesday. This team, we have accepted our responsibility in this. But I'm not willing to accept responsibility for issues that were caused by others. And it is clear to me that those lines were longer because members, leaders in one political party were spreading misinformation. I don't know why they were. You guys might want to ask them. Ask them why they were spreading this information, because they didn't get it from us. So we're out here just to set the record straight. We've been doing it since last year, and we're going to keep setting the record straight.
One more question? Anybody? All right. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And thank you all for your time this afternoon. Just as a way to wrap up, this is probably, with the amount of votes that are going to be dropped tonight, it's probably our last press conference in this room. I know you're all very sad about that, as are we. But of course, if there is a major event, if there's something we need to address with you guys, we'll set up a press conference and we'll make ourselves available. Thank you very much.
Thank you.